Hi folks, CodeTutor here and my name is Anil Deshpande. Welcome to another video on Android unit testing. Let me just summarize what we have gone through in the last couple of videos before moving on to the little bit of more advanced topics. In last couple of videos, we tested country filter. Country filter test was written, then we wrote parameterized country filter test to do the parameterized testing to reduce the amount of effort that we have to put to write the test cases. Then we saw a couple of various flavors of this in country filter null tests and country reference tests. And if you are trying to look for a common thread across all these test cases that we have written so far, they are single pure Kotlin functions and objects under test. There are no dependencies like Android dependencies like UI, view model, IO, or coroutines. It was all pure business rule validation. Setup was very simple and the tests were very deterministic. There were no dependencies on external state like database or network. But in any Android application, that is not the case. Your code simply doesn't contain pure functions without any dependencies. You will always have something like repositories, data access objects, live data, view model, composables, all those things. To get started, we will look at the very basic thing, which is a repository and data access object, because I am once again taking a bottom-up approach as I move towards UI layer and view model layer. So let's first implement simple repository and a data access object like you would have implemented in any Android application, and then have a look at how we would have tried to test it. So this is the code base you are already familiar with. The first thing that I will do is I will create data access object. So let me create a new Kotlin class. Let me call it as country DAO. And here, let me create a simple interface with a function get all, which returns me a list of country. And as you can see, the function is a suspend function, because you want to ideally run these kind of IO operations away from the UI thread, which is a concept of coroutine. And now let me create the repository itself. Let me create a class called country repository, and this country repository should take the data access object as the constructor parameter, because repository always depends on the data access object. So I will create private val data source, it is country DAO. Then inside this, let me create a couple of simple functions. Both of them would be suspend functions. One is get all, which basically delegates it to data source get all. And then let me write another suspend function countries by side, and side is the filter, and it should give me a list of country. I can write country filter by drive side. This is the one that we had tested in the last couple of videos. We are just reusing it. So country repository is dependent on data access object, and it also uses the country filter by drive side. And this is okay to get started with, and we want to basically test these things. Now let us try to understand the complication that is involved in testing these things. So this is the code of country repository, and if you look at it, the country repository has an external dependency. The test setup that we actually have to do will have to be dynamic, because it depends upon the data access object, that is DAO, and then country DAO itself. The state has to be simulated. Country DAO itself is a separate object. If you want to test country repository, you cannot be dependent on the dynamic behavior of the country DAO. You have to make sure that it is deterministic. So the country DAO needs to be made deterministic. It cannot be allowed to behave in an uncontrolled manner if at all you want to properly test the country repository. And then The suspend function, countries by side, those are asynchronous APIs. Threads and dispatchers would be involved. So if I try to summarize, testing country repository would basically involve delegation and data flow validation. And if any kind of error is thrown in the countries by side, that error propagation needs to be properly validated as a part of testing country repository. How would you do this? Well, the first thing to worry about is how to make country DAO, that is data access object, deterministic. To do that, we can either use stub or a fake. Now, the question is, what is stub and what is fake? What is the difference? Stub basically returns fixed responses. It doesn't contain any real logic. But in case of fake, it is a lightweight in-memory working logic. That is the main difference between a stub and fake. So once we implement a stub and fake, we can initialize the data access object in the country repository test class, that whatever that we will be writing to do the testing. So let's see how this would get done. So let's get into a demo. So let me go here in the test and let me create a new package repository, and under this let me create test class country repository test, and to test it you would need DAO and repository. So let me create two private instances of DAO and country repository, and then as is the case you have to write the setup method, which is a function setup. This you should be already familiar with because we have already done it before. You have to initialize the repository. That is, if I invoke the constructor, then I have to pass the country DAO. Now I don't have country DAO. Country DAO needs to be initialized with either stub or fake, and that we will do now. Let me show you here itself. I will create a class stub country data access object, and it implements the interface country data access object, and as a part of that it has to override get all. I will create list of countries. So I have a stub ready, and the get all function is always going to return me this particular list. So let me return this. So what I can do is I can now initialize this country DAO with stub and pass this country DAO as the constructor parameter to the repository that it needs. You might be wondering how I was able to pass a stub which is just going to always return these values, because it is an interface. So country repository expects a interface. So as long as you have anything that implements that particular interface, in this case it is a stub, it doesn't care. That is where the beauty of interface actually comes into picture, and that is where ensuring your code adhering to solid principles once again comes into picture. So you have to make sure that your code is already adhering to solid principles before you attempt to do any of these testing related code refactoring in your application. So once you have the country DAO and repository, you can write any number of test cases. That doesn't change at all. To make it a little bit more organized, what I will do is I will move this in a separate file. So usually whatever these stubs or fakes that you create, you usually put it in a separate package called as doubles. And what you can do is create a class here and move this thing over here, and let me fix the import, and that's it. In the next video I will show you how to implement a fake, and then we will be also writing a lot of test cases using these DAO and repository. So stay tuned for the next video. Brings us to the end of this particular video. Don't forget to like, comment, share the video and subscribe to the channel. Take care. Bye.